Fewer Americans believe in God today than they did 5 years ago. The downhill trend has been taking place since at least 2011. Right now, 81% of Americans believe in God. That's down from 87% 5 years ago. That's according to a new Gallup poll. NewsNation's Marc Martin, she joins us live right now. And Marc, what are the key reasons for this decline?
Hey, Kelsey, we talked to several experts today. That poll just released this morning. As you just stated, 81% of Americans say they believe in God. And by the way, that's the lowest that number has been in nearly 80 years.
A new Friday morning Gallup poll taking a look at whether the country is losing its religion. Results show only 81% of U.S. adults believe in God, down from 87% in 2017, the lowest that number has been since the poll began in 1944.
That normalization, that being able to be out, to see ourselves out in public is a really big thing that's changing a lot of minds.
Nick Fish is the president of American Atheists. He thinks there are actually fewer believers than the poll even suggests, that there's still a stigma surrounding being a non-believer. 4 in 10 people believe God hears prayers and can intervene on people's behalf. 28% say God can't intervene. 11% think God does neither. And 17% of Americans say they don't believe in God.
What I've discovered and what I hear is that I'm not Christian, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual.
Reverend Richie Butler is the senior pastor of the St. Luke Community United Methodist Church in Dallas. He's not surprised that belief is at an all-time low.
I think part of the challenge is as our society evolves, I think the church has always been slow to want to embrace that evolution.
According to the poll, the least likely to believe in God, young adults and people on the left of the political spectrum. Women, people of color, non-college graduates, and those who are married, all more likely to believe. While belief may be on the decline, Gallup has documented steeper drops in church attendance, membership, and confidence in organized religion, suggesting the practice of religious faith may be changing more than the basic faith in God.
And Kelsey, I think it's important just to note here that still the vast majority of Americans do believe in God. This is still a country of faith. It just looks different for different people, whether that's a higher power that can hear your prayers and intervene or doesn't. Kelsey.
Marky, thank you. Well, now for today's Rush Hour Roundtable, we are bringing in our panel earlier to discuss the news throughout the hour. So first, let's introduce you to our panel today. We have Ashleigh Banfield, host of Banfield on NewsNation. Next, Megan Basham, reporter for the Daily Wire. Then Jason Rantz, host of the Jason Rantz Show on KTTH in Seattle. And finally, Marc Lamont Hill, professor in media studies and author of the new book, Seen and Unseen, Technology, Social Media, and the Fight for Racial Justice. So we've just heard from Marc Martin on religion in America. Our big question, are Americans losing their religion and why? Let's get everyone's quick thoughts, starting with Marc.
Well, the first thing I'd say is yes. But we also have to make a distinction between religion and faith, because there are many people who aren't participating in organized religion, or they're taking a more secular approach to faith, but they still believe in God. But as the poll shows, there's also a number of people who no longer believe in God as an idea, as a being, as a force. And that is happening partly because the church and synagogue and the mosque isn't the center of our cultural life anymore. It's also because as our politics change, as generations are more successful, as life shifts, people are simply less tied to religion than they were when they first get to this country or when they're first going through struggle, etc. So it's no surprise that by generation we're losing our religion.
Okay, Ashleigh.
So, I think about this a lot, mostly because I see Ron Reagan on TV, and he keeps reminding me that we should be thinking about atheists and we won't burn in hell if we do. But I do think about this a lot, and let me tell you why. After 9/11, I was one of the victims of 9/11, and I had a real epiphany that day. And I remember people in New York particularly asking one big question over and over: how could there be a God if this happened? And there were so many conversations on television about this, and it was perplexing for a lot of people because maybe they hadn't you know, come face to face with tragedy of that magnitude. Elsewhere in the world, they come to face, you know, that pretty regularly. And when I went over to Afghanistan and subsequently every other war zone, those questions were really profound. And since 9/11, Kelsey, we've had social media proliferation, and it's nasty. We've had an Iraq war, an Afghan war, a Ukraine war. We've had school shooting. I can't even count. So I am not the least bit surprised that people across this country are saying, I don't think there's anybody out there watching over us.
Megan, what do you believe?
Well, you know, obviously I am a very religious person. I'm a Christian. I look at these numbers and I wonder if we're mixing up cause and effect here. Because one of the things we know is that people are attending church less often. So a lot of those people who don't attend church say, oh, I'm a believer, but their children aren't believers because they're not taking them to a place where they're taught to think about heavenly and eternal things. And so it's really easy to sort of deaden that part of your brain when you don't use it, when you don't sort of explore spiritual things in life. And I think that that is really going to hurt America in the long run, because the reality is that there are many, many studies that show that religious faith has a profoundly positive effect on a society. People who are married or people who go to church tend to stay married. They tend to have happier marriages. They tend to not struggle with loneliness, with isolation, with issues like drug abuse, alcohol abuse. They tend to be healthier. We also know that they tend to be more charitable. They tend to be more involved in their communities. One of the things that we see is that a lot of civic organizations that do so much work for the homeless, for people in poverty, those typically develop out of churches. So as we lose those things, we're really losing a lot of what holds up the social structure of our communities. So I think we need to talk about how we regain our religion, and I think that's important. And to me, one of the things I see in this study is that I'm going to disagree a little bit with Reverend Butler, where he said he thinks the problem is that the church is not coming along with the times enough. I would actually say I think the church has come along with the times a little too much. And part of the problem, to borrow from the words of Jesus, is that if the church is not salty, if the salt is not salty, then it lacks a drawing power there. It's not a light on a hill, and people aren't drawn to it. So I think that's something that the church needs to look at in itself.
Okay, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the reason you're seeing these poll numbers the way they are is because we've taken God completely out of society. And when you see that it's not just young people, but it's folks who are on the left of the aisle, as this poll says, that obviously makes sense, because there is a political party right now that is certainly not embracing religion and God the way that the other party is. And when you see more people who are conservative, believing in God and holding to those principles, it makes total sense that you're having folks who are sort of leading the culture, younger people who are, pushing the culture forward, whether it's on social media, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's in music, whatever it happens to be. They have decided to take God out of it. They have decided to go away from that. And at the same time, what are we seeing? We're seeing that exact same demographic, young folks who are lonelier, who are getting more unhealthy, who are not going towards all of the things that Megan just mentioned, like marriage, that does bring people together, going to church or synagogue or a mosque, which does bring communities together. So we're seeing all of these breakdowns at the exact same time as people are going away from God. And I think that that's all connected.
Well, you're also seeing it as, God doesn't have your back when you see the Catholic Church exploding into scandal year after year after year. So that could have a really profound effect on the next generation, saying, wait, I thought this was supposed to be a pure house.
That's exactly
absolutely,
right.
And I think that that's a fair point. I don't want to dismiss the fact that the Catholic Church has not handled scandal very well. In fact, they made it worse in a lot of ways. However, when we're talking about God, it's not necessarily us talking about an organized religion per se or a religious institution. As a Jew, I don't go to church, obviously, and so that doesn't necessarily impact the way that I view God. And I do think that those are parts of the nuances that are important in this conversation.
But I think those nuances are where sometimes we have to drill down on and we find some differences. I mean, Jason, you're Jewish. That's a great example, right? Within the Jewish tradition, it's possible to be a secular Jew. It's possible to be an Orthodox Jew. It's possible to be an atheist Jew, right? There's a lot of room here, but oftentimes, and we can have there are debates about that. But certainly, there are people who would talk about, whether you're engaged in religious practice or cultural. Yeah, absolutely. But that's my point, right? No one says I'm a cultural, few people say I'm a cultural Muslim or I'm a cultural Christian. And so the stakes are much higher. And many young people believe that in order to be a Christian or in order to be a Muslim, they have to adopt a set of beliefs and practices that are at odds with the current culture. But where I would disagree with you is that I don't think this young generation is particularly godless. And when you look at the stewards of culture, look at hip hop culture, for example, they talk about God all the time. Kanye West is still the most visible figure maybe in the world, and not only does he believe in God and talk about it endlessly. I mean, people may become atheists if Kanye talks about it so much. He makes gospel albums. So I think I don't think it's that this generation doesn't engage or believe in God as much as it is. Again, there's in a lot of ways. I don't want to say Ashleigh said this, but this is what she alludes to: the case is against God in their minds, right? It's how there's an idea in religious thought called theodicy. Right? The relationship between God and justice. And the question is, how fundamentally, how do good things happen to bad people and how do bad things happen to good people? And this generation is tired of trying to explain that away against the backdrop of an all-loving God when the world is so loveless.
But they're not being taught any of the answers to some of those questions or even to have those conversations. Those conversations are not happening with young people. And so I feel you on that part of maybe not understanding how to contextualize some of this and explain some of this away, or at least sort of address those inner conflicts that you're mentioning of how can bad things happening. But we're not having those conversations.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure we're not. I think we're having it in a different way. I've never seen a proliferation of Brene Brown self-help in my life. I mean, I just can't imagine how much self-help is out there on the internet, and the followings that these people have, the billions of dollars they're making from the sales of their books and their seminars. Like, people do want to do good. They just might not want to do it in that particular building.
But I also think that, there's a certain spiritual discipline and a raising within the church that we're not seeing that's just slowly drifting away. And Marc Lamont brought up the fact that, frankly, that being in wealth, being a very privileged society, tends to make you fall away from God, whereas struggles bring you back to God. And one of the things that we're hearing is, this idea that, well, why does God let bad things happen? And that's contributing to a lack of faith. Well, that's not new. People have been asking that question for thousands of years. And, I would encourage people as a Christian to go, listen, the church has answers for that. If you assume that, your question is new and they've never heard that question before, that's certainly not the case. So to me, it's really just a question of not really looking that hard. I mean, we're sort of assuming that pastors, theologians don't have answers for the toughest questions. I think they do have those answers. And I think part of that is teaching kids, teaching people that that's where you go to get them.
Okay, well, we're going to move on. Should people who are grieving be able to honor their loved ones however they want? This is coming up next. We'll talk about some situations where the person grieving was told you can't do that when it comes to honoring the dead. Tonight, we're following two controversial stories involving gravestones in Iowa and Alabama. An Iowa family's final joke with their late father, stirring up a lot of drama when they use profanity on the headstone. And an Alabama man is facing charges for placing flowers on his fiance's gravestone. You heard that right. NewsNation's Sloan Glass has more details on these two wild stories. Sloan.
Kelsey, it's two bizarre stories coming out of a cemetery, and you're likely to have opinions on both, or at least scratch your head at how this is actually happening. Both stories are raising the question, should you be able to control how other people grieve? The first involves a man who was found guilty of criminal littering for placing flowers at his fiance's gravesite. Winston Hagens was sentenced to 30 days in jail, a sentence that the Alabama judge suspended. Winston's fiance is buried on a family lot, and her father, who owns the plot, has the final say on what can and can't be left there. He filed a criminal complaint. The planters were decorated with photos of his fiance and inscribed with the lyrics from the song that was playing when Hagens proposed. Now, Hagens was on Banfield this week, and here's what he had to say.
Yes, I actually walked through that. That specific cemetery had over 70 other planters that are currently still there. And so when I put the first box out, like I said, the first few months that Hannah's body was laid to rest in that plot, it was owned by her uncle. And it wasn't until the first box was taken that her dad ended up going, whatever it looks like to have the ownership of a flower box transferred over.
And coming out of Iowa, honoring a loved one with one final joke or just plain offensive. The grave causing the controversy reads, "Forever in our hearts, until we meet again, cherish memories known as our son, brother, father, papa, uncle, friend, and cousin." Seems innocent enough, but when read vertically, well, let's just say we have to blur it. And the families of others laid in rest nearby are not happy. They want the grave removed. The family says they hope all sides can come to an agreement. They do not want to take down what they call a fitting tribute to their dad. But they also don't want to offend anyone. However, community members are reportedly organizing a legal response. Kelsey.
Sloan, thank you. Well, let's welcome back our Roundtable panel about this topic. And Ashleigh, we know that you've spoken with the fiancés Winchester Hagens on your show this week. And our big question here, should people be allowed to grieve however they want? Ashleigh, we'll begin with you.
Well, he's going to appeal that case, Kelsey. So I'll tell you something. I nearly lost my lunch when I heard that he was sentenced to 30 days in jail, suspended if he would agree not to leave any more flowers at your fiance's grave, which he had to do, and $300 fine. There is something called the letter of the law. I get it. And then there's the spirit of the law. And this is what I don't get. How could prosecutors have wasted all their busy time and money to go after this particular case, especially since it wasn't so egregious, because that cemetery did have other flower boxes? Okay, the rules are you can't have stuffed toys that rot. You can't have plastic things that get, gross and look like garbage. But it's a little weird with the boxes. They say boxes, but not flower boxes. And again, there are more than one of these flower boxes. I think this is just sour grapes from Hannah's dad, who never liked Winchester. And Hannah's dad is, he's the Reverend Tom Ford. The Reverend Tom Ford wouldn't let Winchester come to his fiance's funeral and won't let him leave flower boxes behind. I mean, come on.
I might flip that a little bit. I kind of feel for everybody in this situation. And if anybody who's been through something like this, you know that tempers can run really, really high when people are in pain. And what you sense is that everyone in this situation is suffering the loss of a loved one. Her father is, and her fiance is. And so I look at both sides and go, can you not find a way to honor her memory without this sort of feuding literally over her grave? So I look at, I think it was Winston, can he not find a way to honor her without seeming to provoke her dad? And I would say the same thing to the Reverend there, that, look, this was the man she chose. It was the man that she loved.
Megan, just his presence wasn't allowed. I mean, I don't think there's a reasonable side on this, and I think it's on Hannah's dad. Those boxes are not, you know, Disney-esque or circus-esque.
And I hear what you're saying,
and he wasn't even allowed to come and grieve. How is that? How is that a man of faith?
I feel like I would need to hear the Reverend's backstory here to go, you know, I really don't feel like I have enough information on those two people to make a judgment. So you would need to tell me what was going on in the background that made the Reverend, her father, react like this.
He didn't like
well,
Winchester.
I dove a little bit into this story, and it does seem...
It
seems like the father is being especially petty in this case based on what I've read. At the same time, we also have to understand that the husband, as much as I totally understand, he can also maybe step back just for a moment and rethink the way that he would grieve, only so that we are not continuing this kind of just petty back and forth. Even though, again, I think the husband in all of this, or he would have been the husband, I think he's in the right. On the other hand, when we go to the vulgar tombstone, that I think I'm totally with the family on that. Unless you are specifically going to that tombstone looking for that language, no one is actually going to truly see it. People don't just wander around and go look at random gravestones nearby and, you know, complain about these things. The family members around, stay in your area. This does not impact you at all. This was an inside joke for that family, and I do think they get to grieve in that way.
I wonder if they couldn't come up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with Jason. I mean, I think that I feel sorry for people whose lives have been put in such a position that they have to grieve with these tombstones. I mean, I can't imagine the pain they're dealing with, that this would be a logical outcome for them or a healthy outcome for them. But they have a right to do it. And I think it's not on us to determine it. If they were putting a huge float or some huge, you know, some huge monument that offended everybody, if it was a big middle finger flailing through the cemetery, maybe, but just this, I don't care.
It's subtle.
And right. And the pettiness, the pettiness of the first story, again, I probably need a little bit more info, but there's no winners here in general. And again, that's often the case when it comes to grieving.
Okay, we're going to stop there. We have another topic to discuss right after the break. We'll talk about why Starbucks is considering closing their bathrooms to non-customers. The CEO of Starbucks says the company might change the chain's bathroom policy. Right now, anyone can use the bathroom at Starbucks, but Howard Schultz says they may go back to an old rule, only allowing paying customers to use the restroom. Schultz made those comments at a forum last week, citing mental health and safety concerns among baristas. Starbucks created the open-door bathroom policy back in 2018 after a controversial incident back in Philadelphia where 2 black men were asked to leave the coffee shop when they tried to use the bathroom. The employee called the police, saying the men weren't paying customers. In fact, they arrived at the shop early for a business meeting. Okay, Roundtable. On one hand, it's a walk-in business. Anyone can come in and buy something or not. On the other hand, the CEO is saying people feel unsafe. So there, of course, are concerns. Should those concerns be heard? What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I care more about the folks who have to deal with the homeless folks or the mentally ill, drug addicts who oftentimes, especially in certain cities like Seattle, Portland, LA, DC, and New York, they're just hanging out there the entire time. It's not fair to the staff to have to try to figure out how to deal with them. Certainly not fair to the paying customers who actually want to use the bathroom. Starbucks is not here to treat homelessness or drug addiction. And while I totally understand the need for access to restrooms, the people who would love to see this, they can open up their own homes or their own businesses if they please.
Okay, Mark.
I strongly disagree. And one, I think we can't ignore the context here that Starbucks did this because of a racial incident, an incident of racial injustice where paying customers were recognized as or identified as non-paying customers. And when we look at the misidentification of black and brown customers, et cetera, that's something we have to take seriously when we make these rules. Second, I don't accept the idea that the primary people who use public bathrooms are mentally ill or homeless people. And even if they were, I don't want to stigmatize them as this problem that the rest of us need to be afraid of. I happen to own a cafe in Philadelphia, Uncle Bobby's, and, you know, lots of people come in to use the bathroom. Do I love having my staff clean the bathroom after people who didn't even buy a cup of coffee come in? Of course not. But to be honest, I find that it's much more common that people spend the buck or two on a cup of coffee to hang out for 8 hours, do their work, and then use the bathroom 10 times. I find them to be more annoying than the person who just comes through for 30 seconds.
For folks who leave used needles in the bathrooms, do you think it's fair to have your employees have to clean that up? I understand that doesn't happen in every single case, but it definitely happens. And it happens a lot in certain cities, and that's why they went to this policy to begin with.
Yeah, if I could just jump in with a personal story really quick. It wasn't a Starbucks, it was another cafe, but it was just maybe about 6 months, 8 months ago, my husband stopped in a cafe and found a guy overdosing in the bathroom. They had to call the EMS, they had to get him Narcolepsy. I can't remember what the drug is, but he stayed and watched them take care of this man. And it really is a danger. And I think it would have been one thing if there had been a blanket policy. Look, everybody has to buy something or you don't get to use the bathroom. If that is the policy for everyone, then let's have training and make it sure that it's enforced.
Amen to that. But you know something, I believe that companies should be able to do what they want.
Just so that I'm clear, your argument against doing this is that someone's life was saved because they almost died in the bathroom? I mean,
because they went in to use the bathroom to shoot up. So you have someone who is now on serious mind-altering substances, and you're putting the people who work there in danger. I mean, it is a fact statistically that when you work in a place where people who are using drugs, when they're on these substances and they're coming in and they know that they're going to go in and do something, you are putting these young people who aren't equipped to deal with this. They are often very young. It's their first job. They're working behind the counter at these places.
Take Starbucks out of the picture. This is a private company, and they should be able to determine the rules in their establishments. I kind of forgot, and I use the Starbucks bathroom. I feel like I got to put a raincoat on and sneak in there sometimes because I just assumed if I didn't buy something, I shouldn't be using their facilities.
I agree 100% that companies should have the right to make their choice. You know, that's not my argument. My argument is, as they're making the decision, they should make the right decision. What I believe to be the right decision is to make this an open space. I get it. A barista is not trained to be a conflict resolver, not to be a drug counselor, not to be, any of these things that we often ask people to be. I get that. But the problem is we don't want them anywhere. We don't want safe injection facilities. We don't want people to be in schools. We don't want them on the street.
We want them in treatment. We want them in treatment. We want them in shelters. Right. We want to get them the help that they actually need, and they're not going to get it at a Starbucks.
But we don't invest in those things, Jason. We don't invest in treatment. We criminalize.
But that's not Howard Schultz's fault.
Well, the biggest problems are happening in Democrat-run cities. So if you want to start spending more money and actually taking those votes, I will happily stand behind that.
Guys,
but we're not doing that.
Producers are telling me to wrap. Sit tight. We'll be right back. something a little special. We want to wish all the dads out there a happy Father's Day this weekend, and let's give a special shout out to all the father figures in our lives. We're going to start with Jason.
I lost my father 8 years ago, and it was very unexpected, so happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And of course, make sure you tell your father and your mother and every other family member you love them.
Ashleigh.
Happy Father's Day to Chris Hayner, my husband, best stepdad ever, to the kids that are covered up by the banner, Fisher and Ridley.
Okay, Megan.
Oh, yeah, I love this. So I just want to wish happy Father's Day to my dad, Steve Carl. That's him with my girls there, and my husband, Brian. Happy Father's Day, honey.
Okay, Mark, and I think I'm hearing that you're a new father. So happy Father's Day. Is that true?
I am new father round 2. I am sending one off to college. I'm sending one to college in August. She's headed to Columbia, and my son was born April 10th. So it's a young man's sport. I'm learning. Which is why my eyes look like this. But I'm very happy to be celebrating a Father's Day. I have 3 wonderful children, and I lost my dad. This might be my second Father's Day without him, so I'm sending love to everybody who will be feeling some pain and some loss during this time.
So many incredible fathers. I've got an amazing one, and that's all for now for NewsNation Rush Hour tonight. Thanks for watching. On Balance with Leland Bitter is next.